Travis Kelce doesn't give a damn about your typos. And of course, can anyone stop the Chiefs? Of course, the answer to that is no. Also, is 2024 the year of Joe Burrow?
Oh.
One of our favorite writers who is kind enough to provide 100 hot takes during the deadest time of every sports year thinks it is. We will discuss. And of course, it is Thursday, the most motivational segment in all of sports. I am Nick Wright, doing my normal job and Kevin Wild's job because he couldn't be bothered to be here. Danny Parkins is here as well. Chris Broussard. Anyone on the Bubble Bud list?
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks for.
It was actually Joel Embiid.
Oh, there we go. Good answer. Joel Embiid almost on the Bubble Bud list. All right, let's get to it. We're going to start with Jalen Hurts. While Brew claims it's over, we won't actually know if the Eagles shook their supernatural funk for a few months, and Philly media is not going to let you forget it happened. The godfather of Philly radio, Howard Eskin, thinks Jalen Hurts needs to prove himself all over again, saying he needs to have a good year or they're going to Carson Wentz him. He's got to have a good year and he can't make excuses. Just go out there and be the best player you can be. Chris Broussard, famously, you picked the Eagles to go to the Super Bowl. You picked the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. You were fly Eagles fly all year long. Your reaction.
I think I picked Baltimore to beat them, did I?
At this point, I have a hard time keeping all the wrong predictions correct. You definitely had them getting to the Super Bowl.
I had them going there.
Brew, your reaction to Howard Eskin saying that Jalen Hurts could get Carson Wentz?
He walked it back a little today. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
A little bit. He said, because in that quote it was like, it's a fact he will get Carson Wentz traded, released. They traded Wentz, but if he doesn't play well. Today it was more like, well, he could.
Okay.
He could. Really. So here's the thing, and this is why he walked it back. It doesn't make that much sense. Now, certainly Hurts has to have a great year. He's not Mahomes, and he hasn't played well enough where, you know what I mean? It's like he's absolutely like a top 5 quarterback in the league. But they had Jalen Hurts on the team when they traded Carson Wentz. Unless you think Pittsburgh was the problem and not Kenny Pickett, that player doesn't exist in Philadelphia. So that's one. Secondly, Nick, and I'm sure you looked this up, Hurts cap hit for this year is only $13.5 million. Next year is 21.8, so below 22. Then 31.2 in 26, and then 2027 it goes up to 42. But those aren't really bad.
No, they did a weird thing with his contract where there is a $97 million void year at the end, which is a problem for future Philadelphia. Right, that's the problem for future Philadelphia to deal with. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, he needs to play better. He took a step back last year. He surprised everybody, including me, in his year when they got to the Super Bowl. Not so much getting to the Super Bowl, but the way he threw the football, because that's been his issue. Sure. He threw it well that year. He's got the weapons. We know they added Saquon Barkley, which we'll talk about. The two receivers are splendid, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And so, look, I expect a better year from him. He does have the intangibles I like, the leadership, the work ethic, the character. But I just don't think it makes sense. Unless he's just atrocious.
For him to be on the hot seat.
Yeah, because when you look at these cap hits, they're not bad at all.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things. I'm with you. We're not that far removed from him having 3 rushing touchdowns, a passing touchdown, 300 passing yards in a Super Bowl. Right. We're less than 500 days removed from that. So talking about Carson Wentzing him like that's a verb, like he's going to get got or something, is crazy. But he has been downgraded. Like as a stock, as like a person to believe in, he's been downgraded, but not to the level of Carson Wentz. Like I think it's worth remembering Carson Wentz missed significant time with injury in 3 of his 5 years in Philadelphia. Obviously missed their Super Bowl run and wasn't the guy Nick Foles was. But then that year where they did end up trading Carson Wentz for a 3 and a 2, and that 2 ended up becoming a 1 based on his playing time in the future, he was atrocious. And we've got the numbers here to show how bad Wentz was the year before he was traded. And then that's Jalen Hurts, the average basically.
Since he's been the full-time starter.
Yeah. So he's Again, not as good as he was in that Super Bowl year last year. The funk at the end, finishing poorly, all of that is fair. But there is still an Atlantic Ocean-sized gap between Jalen Hurts last year and being bad enough where they would look to replace
Quickly,
him.
Nick, also quickly, Hurts, remember, Wentz was not very liked in the locker room, at least big parts of the locker room.
There's no
and
question about that. And so I want to talk about that because Carson Wentz seems every place he's gone, he's had issues in the locker room, seemingly until he gets to the great locker room of the Chiefs where everyone loves everybody. but in other stops hasn't been great. Here, I look at what Howard Eskin said as almost kind of just slightly shifting the Overton window on the Jalen Hurts conversation, meaning I don't think anybody actually thinks Jalen Hurts is getting cut or traded barring a catastrophe. But I do think it's a legitimate conversation of, do we know Jalen Hurts is good? I think that and by
good?
Yes, are we certain Jalen Hurts is a top 15 quarterback in the league? I think that's average. There's only 32. So are we certain? By good, I mean better than the average league starter. Are we certain of that? And so here's why I think it's a fair question. Because you start with, and I try to be fair, Wilds isn't here to remind everyone, but they do call me Mr. Consistency. There is an element of the situation stuff that I don't think hold against, but use in my grading of Brock Purdy must apply here.
Hold against.
In that case, other than San Francisco, is there a better situation for a quarterback? I don't think so. Maybe Detroit.
Detroit's pretty good.
Detroit's pretty
good. And the question, though, is this, because I know you love Shanahan. Everybody loves Shanahan as a play caller. They don't quite have that in
Correct, right. But what they do have...
They kind of had it the year they went to the Super Bowl.
And what they do have is a better offensive line than in San Francisco. They have,
absolutely.
As far as teams that can say, up to this point, we'll see what it is like post Jason Kelsey, but up to this point, great offensive line, multiple elite weapons by eye test,
absolutely.
Draft capital, what they are paid, and at least an offensive-minded head coach, even if he's not necessarily a genius. You have that in Detroit at a high level, San Francisco at a high level, and, of course, Philadelphia. So kind of pick where you want to be. But you say, oh, what about Cincinnati? Cincinnati doesn't have the offensive line. There's other places that don't have all three things. And then we talk about the supernatural funk, and we joke about it. But if some of that, to me, can fairly fall on the shoulders of great leader quarterback for not being able, if we're not blaming Nick Sirianni because he didn't get fired. Right. It can't all be the fault of Big Dom. If part of Jalen's value is leadership, locker room stuff, then that cuts in both directions. And the reason I asked the question, do we know how good he is maybe the nicer way to put it, is 2022 versus the rest of his career. We can show it to you. And we can show you that because we all know, it is stark. And when you look at each year that he has been the full-time starter, the concern would be that if this year looks like 21, which looked like 23.
Which was his first year as a starter.
I get it, but 23 wasn't, and the numbers are similar. Then we are going to start, Danny, thinking, 2022 was just an outlier year. That he wasn't drafted like he was that guy. Right. People didn't think he was going to be that guy. We're going to say 2022 was the outlier season. That's the concern.
So the point of the different coaches and systems compared to some of those other places, I think is a really interesting one. And we give Philly this credit of being a very stable, good organization. And I think it's deserved. But I didn't know this until I started preparing for this topic today. Jalen Hurts, he's going into, we'll say, his 9th year of big-time football between Oklahoma, Bama, and Philadelphia. Kellen Moore's the new offensive coordinator this year in Philly. So it's his 9th season. Right. You guys know what that is for him in terms of play callers?
I'm going to guess
probably
a high number.
7?
9.
Oh.
Every single year?
I didn't know that. In college, Lane Kiffin, Brian Dable, Mike Loxley, Lincoln Riley. In the NFL, Doug Peterson, Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen, Brian Johnson. And now Kellen Moore. That absolutely matters.
That means the best is yet to come. And also, and I hate to hit you with this, Nick, because you started off the show pretty nice.
Oh, thanks.
But here's a little graphic we have.
What?
his numbers are way better than the guy that just got $275 million. This is the last 3 years since they both been starters. I mean, look at the touchdowns, the interceptions.
That's weird you're doing total yards per game. Oh, because we're not doing passing.
No, because part of